I've been behind the camera for over 50 years now. I started taking pictures when I was 12 years old, and by the age of 17 I was a press photographer on the Yorkshire Post in Leeds. I've always been where the action is, and it seems that everywhere I go, with every organisation I work with, disasters happen. I spent a year with the Royal Air Force in Scotland making a film about their search and rescue organisation, and it was their busiest year. This happened. Piper Alpha, I was on the first rescue helicopter with them to reach that awful scene that night where 167 guys died. That was quite traumatic, but I kept the camera rolling, and that film got me a BAFTA for Best Factual. I was an observer that night, but lots of things have happened to me. I've had 4 near-death experiences where I myself have been the casualty nearly. The first one was in Nicaragua. The negatives damaged because of what happened. I was going up onto a volcano with some volcanologists, and we got to the top and it exploded just as we got there. Tons of rocks came spewing out, whistling into the sky and then flying down around us. We had tin hats on, but that really wouldn't have done anything if it hit, and luckily it didn't. We scrambled down the hill and we ended up with dehydration, but I survived that one. The second one was in the North Sea. I was on a fishing boat with the Royal Air Force again, and it started to literally turn over as I was filming. I jumped off the boat with my camera into this life raft and kept the camera going, and we got a great sequence out of that, as you can imagine. Third one. We were filming again in the Cairngorms in the helicopter, and we lost an engine, and it didn't have enough speed to keep airborne, and we crashed on a mountain top in the snow and rolled 3/4 of a mile down the hill, everything flying off it. I was in the back going around like in a Hoover washing machine. It was just unbelievable. Then it caught fire, and I was the last one out. I then went back into the helicopter that was on fire to grab I had a Coast Guard Marine radio with me, because we didn't know that the aircrew had put out a mayday. Well, we did know they'd put out a mayday, but we didn't know anybody had got it. So I then got out and climbed back up the mountain, which was called Craigmeggy, and I put out the first distress call, and that was picked up by the Coast Guard. But all 9 of us on board that day survived. So that was my third. And then came the big one. This is a story now about myself, my wife Hilary, whose nickname is Mickey. She's sitting down there at the front. Our cat Muffin. And this is a story of what happened to us the days just leading up to 9/11 and afterwards. It's a personal human interest story, no talking heads, and everything that you hear and see in this film now is going to be reality. It's all actuality. There's nothing staged. This is the real stories and the real soundtracks and everything else from that day. It all started back in January 2001 when I arrived with my wife and 8 crew into Lower Manhattan to start filming a documentary called Animal Precinct with the animal cruelty people based in Upper East Side, New York, the ASPCA. And we just started making a 13-part series for Discovery Network. And we'd planned to be in New York for about 8 or 9 months. And I was up there setting it up when all this happened. We were all living down in Lower Manhattan, Ocean Apartments, which is there. We had 8 rooms on the 34th floor. So you can see where we were in relation to the Twin Towers. We had great views. Mickey and I had a 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom apartment which, as probably some of you know, is big for New York. And that was a view, fantastic, overlooking the Hudson River and the East River and Statue of Liberty. It couldn't have been a better place. My team consisted of 8 crew. We had film editors and assistant producers, and this was my frontline crew that would go out with me filming every day with the ASPCA investigators. Lulu, sound, and Becky, assistant producer, and I was producer, director, and the cameraman. So again, this is the Ocean Apartments, and we were living there. Our apartment was on the corner there. I'm just trying to set up the geography for you. And this is where we were, if some of you don't know. Battery Park at the bottom of the island, and Ocean Apartments is there, World Trade Center, and this is the FDR Drive, which runs right up the east side, which is a fast way to get up through Manhattan without going through Midtown and all the traffic there. So we used to drive up here every morning to the ASPCA, which was located up here in 92nd Street. Often after work, we would go up the World Trade Center to the bar in Windows on the World. It was only 2 minutes walk from our apartment, and it was a fantastic place. And it had lovely views. Sorry about the quality of these, but right round Manhattan. In the lobby, there was memorabilia of the construction of the World Trade Center, plaques and bits of this and bits of that. And there was this large model plane dive bombing. I realized afterwards how fortuitous that was going to be. And little did they know what was coming. During Easter of that year, 2001, my daughter Lisa and son JP came over, and we took them up to Windows on the World for Sunday brunch at Easter. And it was the first time that they'd been up there. The views from the south aspect are absolutely fantastic. You've got the Manhattan-Brooklyn Bridge, and the views across Brooklyn over here. In this Brooklyn street, we got a call in May to report of a man throwing cats, trapping cats and throwing them onto the freeway that was just behind those houses. But we couldn't find anything. But one of the investigators found a little kitten. We took this cat back to our apartment and Mickey, and she started to looking after it. The idea was that it was supposed to be with us for 3 weeks, but well, he got old enough to be adopted, but he actually stayed with us. In August that year, I met this chap, a super guy called Mike Puzziferi, who was a battalion chief in the New York Fire Department. The plan was that I was looking to make a film with him after I'd done the Animal Precinct film, a documentary series about a fire chief and the goings-on in the New York Fire Department. But that was to be some 6 months ahead of when I'd finished. And I didn't know then, and he didn't, what was coming around the next corner. Also in August, Mickey planned a week-long weekend with our son and daughter and their friends to come over. This is a shot of her on top of the World Trade Center roof. The idea is that they would come over on September the 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. And the 11th was going to be a breakfast at Windows on the World at 9 o'clock, and then go up onto the roof to look at the magnificent views. I chose that time because the light over New York is fabulous early morning for this sort of vista and in the evening. So that morning we were planning, all of us, JP, John Paul and Lisa and their friends and us were due to be on top of that tower. JP was a police officer at Gipton Nick in Leeds, busiest in the country at the time, and he was going to come over with his police colleagues. In the end, he couldn't make it because he had to do extra shifts. And the police said he couldn't be let off work until the morning of the 11th when he flew out, or he was on his way to us that morning on Tuesday the 11th. Lisa, my daughter, brought her friend Sam out with her on the 8th as planned. They stayed 8th, 9th, and then on the 10th she had to return to London for work. So on the 10th, the night before the 11th, we took them up to JFK to catch the 9 o'clock BA flight back to Heathrow. And before I went, I just took a picture of Lisa in front of the towers. And I think this is probably the last picture taken of it as we knew it. We dropped them off at the airport, and then Mickey and I came down to the Pathmark supermarket, which was our nearest supermarket. Now, in America, the most important thing being a fireman is food. And they spend all day planning big lunches and big dinners. And they use the fire engines to go and get their ingredients. So that evening of the 10th, we arrived down there, and these 3 or 4 fire engines arrived. Mickey and I were already in the supermarket, and about 20 firemen came in, all in the kit, and started doing all their shopping. We did ours, they did theirs, and we came out onto the pavement just as a massive thunderstorm was hitting New York, and amazingly enough, lightning striking the radio mast on top of the tower there. Next to me was the fire chief, and he turned to me and said, "You don't often see this." So whether or not that was somebody saying something, I don't know. The firemen were all lined up either side of us. It was torrential rain, what we call the Florida rain, which is tropical rain, just unbelievable. The fire engines had parked on the road between ourselves and the car park, and when we got out there, one of the officers radioed on his set for them to come round and collect them. And I said to the fire chief, "That's cheating, because we're going to have to run into the car park and we're going to be absolutely soaking." And he turned back to me and said, "That's a great thing of being in the New York Fire Department." So then they all got on the fire engines with their little plastic bags and some paper bags that they have there, with all their groceries, got into the fire engines and went off. And that was the shift that first responded that morning. And I think to Mickey and I, that was the most emotional part of all this. I mean, I was involved with people jumping and everything, but I think it's just seeing the faces of those fire officers that night before that really is the thing that comes back to us. So they all went off. Right, next morning arrives, 7 o'clock. Lulu and Becky came into our apartment just after 7 for breakfast. Mickey always used to do them toast and coffee because, like young people, they didn't have time to do it themselves. And then they would play with Muffin and run around the apartment for about 10 minutes until I said it's time to go to work. It was a beautiful morning as we set off up the FDR drive towards the ASPCA office. We didn't know then what was about to happen. And then we were driving up about 8:45. This plane, American Airlines 11, Corsair American 11, was just taxiing at Boston Airport. We arrived about 8 o'clock at the ASPCA office in 92nd Street. We had the usual coffee and donuts. And again, you probably don't know this, but every emergency service organization in America always has donuts and coffee for the first shifts, everywhere you go. And I've been all over the States, and it happens every day. And that's why they've all got big paunches like me, some of the firemen. Meanwhile, up in Boston, 200 miles north, air traffic control were just giving clearance to 11 to climb to 28,000 feet.
American 11 Boston, no center, roger, climb, maintain level 280. 280, American 11.
Back at the SPCA, I was having a meeting with Anne-Marie Lucas. She was the chief investigator. The day before, we'd taken a dog from a woman, and we were planning that morning to go out and arrest her. That never happened. And we didn't know then, but not far from where we were then, we're discussing this, things were taking a turn for the worst.
American 11, climb, maintain level 350. American 11, climb, maintain level 350. American 11 Boston. Earth 7 Mike Lima, how do you hear?
Mike Lima has you loud and clear.
American 11 Boston. American 11, the American on the frequency, how do you hear me?
This is Adam.
This is Boston. I turned American 20 left and I was going to climb him. He will not respond to me now. American 11, American 11 Boston.
At the same time that Boston lost control with American 11, this girl, she was a senior flight attendant on board American 11, was making an emergency call to her base about what was happening on the plane.
Okay, my name is Betty Ong. I'm number 3 on flight 11. And the cockpit is not answering their phone. And there's somebody stabbed in business class, and we can't breathe in business class. Somebody's got mace or something.
Can you describe the person that you said someone is what in business class?
I'm sitting in the back. Somebody's coming back from business. If you can hold on for 1 second, they're coming back. Okay. Our number 1 got stabbed. Our purser is stabbed. Nobody knows who stabbed who, and we can't even get up to business class right now because nobody can breathe.
Okay.
And our number 5, our first class passengers, our first class galley flight attendant, and our purser has been stabbed. And we can't get to the cockpit. The door won't open. Hello? I think the guys are up there. They might have jammed their way up there or something. Nobody can call the cockpit. We can't even get inside. Is anybody still there?
Yes, we're still here.
Okay. I'm staying on the line as well.
Okay.
Hi, who is calling reservations? Is this one of the flight attendants, or who are you, hon?
She gave her name as Betty Ong.
Betty?
Yeah, I'm number 3. I'm number 3 on this flight.
You're the number 3 on the flight?
Yes.
And this is flight 11? From where to
flight
where?
11.
Have you guys called anyone else?
No. Somebody's calling medical, and we can't get a doctor.
What's going on, Betty? Betty, talk to me. Betty, are you there? Betty? Do you think we lost her? I think we might have lost her.
So the time was now 8:46. Still at the SPCA, somebody came into the office where we were and said a plane had just hit the World Trade Center. And we thought, like most people that heard that first report, that it was a Cessna or a helicopter, because every day down there were tourist planes and that going around and around. And we used to watch them underneath us, flying underneath, scores of them. And we thought that had happened. So I went to the telephone, called Mickey down at Ocean Apartments and asked her to look out the window and if she could see anything. She said she could see people running around and I hear sirens, but that was all. Where we were looking south. We couldn't really turn and look up the street, up West Street to the towers. Mickey Muffin. The first 911 call was just coming in to the fire department, to the dispatcher, John Livesey. It was from a guy that was up on the 106th floor. He was in Windows on the World, and this was the first 911 call that came in to the fire department.
Fire Department 408, where's the fire?
Yeah, hi. I'm on the 106th floor of the World Trade Center. We just had an explosion up here.
Okay, 106th floor. What building are you in, sir? 1 or 2?
One World Trade.
All right. 1? Yeah.
Yeah, there's smoke, and we had about 100 people up here.
Sit tight. Do not leave, okay? There's a fire or an explosion or something in the building. All right, I want you to stay where you are.
Yes.
All right, what's your phone number there?
We're on the 106th floor.
Yeah, what's your phone number? Sir, your phone number.
646.
Yeah.
752.
Yeah.
2436.
All right, we're there. We're coming up to get you.
See the smoke coming up from outside the windows down?
All right, we're on the way.
Huh?
We're on the way, sir.
Okay.
All right, just keep some windows open. If you can open up windows and just sit tight. It's going to be a while because there's a fire going on downstairs.
Open the windows unless we break.
Okay. Just sit tight. All right, just sit tight. We're on the way.
Not long after that, the second plane went in, and a second call came in, well, one of hundreds actually, to the fire department, from a girl on the 83rd floor. Now, this is a very disturbing phone call, but I'm going to play it because this is the reality of what happened that day, and it's a very disturbing and shocking telephone call to the dispatcher operator, but this brings it all together and what people were going through at the time. Her name's Melissa Doy.
Mary, Mother's God. 8695, good morning, have a good day. Hi, what's your number again, please? 8695. I'm on the 83rd floor. 86 what? I'm on the 83rd floor. Tell me, 86 what? Are they going to be able to get somebody up here? Well, of course, ma'am. We're coming up to you. Well, there's no one here yet, and the floor is completely engulfed. We're on the floor, and we can't breathe. Okay. And it's very, very, very hot. Are the lights still on? The lights are on, but it's very hot. Ma'am. Very hot. We're all the way on the other side of Liberty, and it's very, very hot. Ma'am, listen. Cameras, everybody's coming. Everybody knows. Everybody knows what happened, okay? Sure. But no, they had to take time to come up here. You know that. Got to be very careful. Very hot. And so how many people where you're at right now? There's like 5 people here with me. All up from the 83rd floor? 83rd floor. With 5 people. 5 patients. Everybody's having trouble breathing? Everybody's having trouble breathing. Some people are worse. And some people unconscious. Everybody's awake? So far, yes. But it's listen. Everybody's awake? Yes, so far. Conscious. And it's very hot there, but no fire, right? I can't see. No, it's too hot. Very hot. No fire for now, and no smoke, right? No smoke, right? Of course there's smoke. Ma'am, you have to stay calm. There is smoke. I can't breathe. Okay, you stay calm with me, okay? I understand. I think there is fire because it's very hot. Okay. It's very hot everywhere on the floor. Okay. I'm going to die, aren't I? No. I'm going to die. Ma'am, say your prayers. And we're going to think positive because you got to help each other get off the floor. I'm going to die. No, stay calm. God. You're doing a good job, ma'am. You're doing a good job. It's so hot. I'm burning up. Help! That's what I'm doing. I'm just letting you know. Hello, ma'am? Help! Stay calm. Ma'am? Help! Stay calm. Just don't move. Oh, my God.
After making the call to Mickey, I grabbed Lulu and Becky and said, let's have a drive down to see what's going on. We didn't know all this was going on around us. So we got into our Jeep and we started to drive down the FDR drive. And as soon as we got onto the FDR drive, we could see the smoke drifting across the East River at the lower end. And as we got nearer, we could see both towers burning. And we knew then that this wasn't a Cessna crash. It was obviously something more serious and probably could have been terrorism, but we didn't know that at the time. So we made our way down. The traffic was very slow, but we got down to Lower Manhattan. As we got to the Brooklyn Bridge, there's a police roadblock. Nobody could go any further south. But I showed the policeman my British press card and said British TV. And unlike here, they waved me through. So we got down. But as we were getting nearer, there was crowds of people coming the other way. It was just an unbelievable sight. Everybody's running away from Lower Manhattan. But we managed to get further down towards the towers, but we couldn't get anywhere nearer, so we ditched the Jeep and we started to make our way towards the towers. Now, we're in September, we've been there since January, so we knew the area very well. This was our neighborhood, so to speak, and we knew all the back alleys and everything around the area. The police had sealed most of it off by now. Anyway, we managed to get down into West Street, which is the main road that runs underneath the towers, dual carriageway. I had a second camera with me. Becky and Lulu were with me, and I gave Becky the second camera. I said, go off, Becky, and get some shots. And Lulu can stay with me, and we'll try and find what's happening at this end. So Becky went off. So it was just me and Lulu. Lulu was connected to me with a cable, with our sound mixer. We made our way up West Street and ended up underneath the South Tower just as the fire chief, assistant commissioner was arriving, called Steve Gregory, and he was setting up the command and control post. So as a filmmaker, this was great. You know, he was the Steve McQueen of the Towering Inferno. And in any documentary, you need human interest. And looking at what I could see, this, from where I was, which was like there, I knew that Steve would be a great sort of character to follow through the extinguishing of the fire or whatever was going to happen. And I'd been filming Steve and his team for about 20 odd minutes, and he was just taking a list of the number of units that were arriving to him. What was happening, the fire engines were coming into town, and the fire officers would come to our position, and then Steve would say, you and you go into North Tower, you and you go into South Tower. So we were the central command. Unbelievable. And by this time, which was not long after the second plane had gone in, we had 500 firefighters there. I mean, can you imagine that here? I don't think we've got that on duty at the moment in the UK. So there I was with Lulu, and we'd been filming Steve and his team for about 20 minutes, and suddenly there's an explosion. I'm in the middle of a shot, you hear it. I pan the camera around and look up. I'm looking through the viewfinder just to see the top of the South Tower begin to peel off. I mean, it was just like a massive tsunami of debris, and it was fanning out like a big umbrella. I could hear the firemen shouting, run, 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 down the street. And I stood there for, it seemed like an eternity. It was about 3 or 4 seconds. I mean, these were the 2 tallest buildings in the world at the time, about 1,800 feet. So the debris was taking time to come down. And I stood there filming this. Lula was connected to me with the sound mixer. And I suddenly thought, oh, I think we'd better get out of here. So I shouted, Lulu, run, run, run. So we started to run down the street. And in front of me, I could see the firemen taking off all their breathing apparatus and legging it ahead of us. They were about 50 yards ahead of us. I kept my camera rolling. It was a small handheld camera, and I had it over my left shoulder. It was seeing what was coming towards us, but I couldn't see it. I could hear it, And it was just like being on the runway at Heathrow with a dozen jumbo jets, not one, coming up behind you. Absolutely amazing roar, and crashes and bangs and everything. And I'm running down the street with Lulu, and the next thing I remember, the camera disappears from my hand in slow motion and everything goes black. So what I'm going to do now is show you all that I've just talked about on film. So we arrive down there, crowds. As we get down into Lower Manhattan, there's a guy just come out of one of the buildings, a really shocked, amazing guy, and he gives a running description of what's just happened. And then you'll see how we work our way to the towers and we meet with Gregory. The narration is by Mike, which is the fire chief I met earlier.
World Trade Center, 1060. Take every available ambulance, everything you got to the World Trade Center now. That's for 660. All 4 days that Marine 6 advising a second plane into the World Trade Center. Okay.
I was at my sister Lisa's apartment, helping her get her son Michael ready for school. But Paul was already heading down the east side of New York toward the blazing towers. Two hijacked planes had been slammed deliberately into the Twin Towers. Their fuel load of 10,000 gallons ignited immediately. In the towers, which at that time of day housed about 15,000 people, there must have been complete panic. Many were spilling out into the street.
This is a U.S. airline. It was a plane, commercial plane coming towards us. I said, it's going to hit my building. It's going to hit my building. All of a sudden, it made a left-hand turn and a right, and it hit. All of a sudden, the whole downtown area just shook. It just literally, I thought it was an earthquake at 1.2, and then you could literally see the whole thing just explode. It was horrible.
Within minutes of arrival, a fifth alarm was transmitted for a major incident in a high-rise building.
10-4 authority, Chief KNC, fifth alarm, west investing.
50 units were arriving on the streets below. On board, the men were thinking this fire would be one hell of a fight. But for many of them, this would be their last alarm. Our communications room was being deluged with calls from desperate people trapped high in the towers.
We get reports on the 104th floor, back room, 25 to 30 people trapped. I also have the 103rd floor, 103, with people trapped also. I have the 83rd floor.
When the wind shifted, firefighters could see at least 5 floors completely involved in fire. They knew that for those inside, conditions would be dire. As the jet fuel cascaded from floor to floor, burning everything in its path, it grew in volume, fed by oxygen, sucked through the elevator shafts in the center core. The temperature of 2,000 degrees blasted everything that got in its way. Those who survived the initial impact would be incinerated in seconds. 45 minutes into the incident, 1,000 feet below, 500 firefighters have already arrived. Surrounding them are the remains of passengers from Flight 175. Over 100 firefighters had already been given orders and entered the 2 buildings. On West Street, Assistant Commissioner Steve Gregory had arrived, directly below the South Tower, with Safety Battalion Chief Arthur Lakiotis. They were setting up a command post. Paul Berriff had joined them with his camera. Everything was going as planned. Units were arriving and being sent to work. For some, these would be their final moments. And then it happened. It was 0955. Over 2,000 people, including 343 of my brothers, had just perished. Commissioner Steve Gregory and Safety Chief Arthur Lakiotis were thrown to the ground and survived. Paul Berriff was injured and later recovered, but some of the others that had been around them were not so lucky.
It was a way that we ran down the street that decided whether we'd live or not. There was 22 of us at the command post when all that happened, and we started to run down the street. Lulu and I ran, and Gregory and Lakiotis, we ran straight down the street. The other firemen, they went left and right, and they didn't survive. So it was like a 3-4 foot corridor. Had we gone that way or stepped over that way, we wouldn't be here today. After 30 minutes, and I didn't know it was that, I came round. I was lying in all the debris, and I didn't know until some time after that I'd been lying there, and the North Tower had come down on top of me as well. All I remember was the camera leaving me in slow motion, and everything goes black. And I remember sort of in my subconscious seeing like sparklers and fireworks on bonfire night and firemen in slow motion, but that must have been in my subconscious. And I didn't know I'd been knocked out for half an hour. And I came round and I was starting to crawl through all the debris. My trousers were really hot, everything was burning around me. I couldn't see anything. My eyes were full of gunge, my mouth was full of gunge, my nose and my ears. And it was like sort of cement mixture. It was a bit like, I don't know if any of you remember a cereal called Ready Break. And I can still taste that sort of a cardboardy taste, but my mouth was absolutely full. I couldn't breathe. So I started to pull stuff out of my mouth. I'm lying on the floor now. I'm being taught by firemen how to survive in the burning building. If this room's on fire now, it's full of smoke. If you get down onto the floor, there's always 3 or 4 inches of air to breathe, and you crawl out. That didn't happen that day. I was getting very hot and sweaty, and I was looking to breathe, and I couldn't find this. And it was at that point I thought, you know, you've done it this time, Paul, you've crossed the line. My life didn't flash before me, but I thought about Mickey and the kids, and thought, well, they wonder where I am, and nobody knew apart from the guys at the ASPCA that we'd gone down there. What had happened to Lulu? She'd been grabbed by one of the fire chiefs, and they'd run into an underground garage. I didn't know that at the time. So I'm crawling through all this debris. Can't see a thing. My eyes are hurting. I can hardly breathe. I'm still getting gunge out of my mouth, a gun right down the back of my throat. And it's pitch black. Stuff's still coming around. And I feel the side of a car. And I knew that the way West Street was laid out and the streets around it, that there was no cars on West Street, but cars in the side street were pointing down towards the Hudson River. So I thought if I can follow the cars with my hand, I'll eventually get to the river and probably be able to breathe. I get to car 3, run my hands down, and I feel this leg, and it's a fireman's tunic. And I remember shouting, "Can I use your bottle? Can I use your bottle? I wanted some oxygen." He didn't reply, so he'd been killed. I'm going a bit further. I'm hot and sweaty, hardly breathing. I don't know what the hell has happened. All I remember was the top 3 floors coming down in front of the camera. I didn't know what you all knew, that the towers had actually collapsed. In fact, those of us, not only me, but the firemen and police that were there, in the epicenter, didn't know what the world knew, because we were in it. But you all saw the big white shots of it all coming down. So I'm crawling and crawling, and then suddenly the visibility picks up a little bit, and it goes from 10 to 25 yards. I stand up, and I remember saying to myself, "Paul, you're still breathing, you're still breathing." What I could see around me was monochrome. Everything was in black and white, with all the debris and dust and everything. It was like being in the aftermath of a volcano. And the trees were all bent over, nobody around but me. And I started to walk a bit further down, Albany Street it was called. And then suddenly this fear hit me. Where's Lulu? and being the lead team member, I was responsible for her. And I've never felt so awful in all my life, and it was my responsibility to look after her. Anyway, I turned round and backtracked and went back down the street and made my way to the corner where we got hit. And there in the debris was a Lulu sound mixer. So I pulled up the cable, and attached to it was my camera about 3 foot under the debris. I couldn't see Lulu anywhere, so I was still very worried about this. Anyway, I stood up and looked at the site now. We could see about 200 yards. The building on my right, that one there, was on fire from the bottom floor to the top. The fire engines and ambulances and everything else that was in the street was on fire in front of me. And then through the haze, I could just see bits of the tower embedded in the road. Again, I didn't know that it completely collapsed. It was just apocalyptic. And there I was in the middle of all this. And researching afterwards, I think I was probably the first live person right in the epicenter, because everybody had run or they were lying dead in the debris. But I couldn't see anyone else, and I was there. And I looked down at this smash camera and tape recorder, and something told me that I'd crossed the line and to walk away. Now, normally, being trained in all my emergency services thing, I would go in and try and help and see what was going on. But something said in my head, leave it. And I turned around and walked back down West Street to Ocean Apartments, into the lobby, and Lulu was in there. So great relief. So I get a drink of water, and Lulu turned to me and she says, Paul, your shirt, the back of your shirt's covered in blood. I said, oh, is it? And your head's got blood all on the back of it. And obviously something had hit me on the back of the head, unbeknown to me, and knocked me out. So there I was in the lobby with Lulu. Meanwhile, after my phone call to Mickey, she grabbed Muffin in his little basket, and they'd gone down the fire escape and gone into Battery Park, which was just a few hundred yards across from our apartment. And they were standing there with the crowd, and she heard this noise, and the second plane comes in over her head, Flight 175, and it turns, and it went in at an angle to miss our apartment. It was aiming for it, and then turned, and if you look at the towers, you'll see that it went in like that to miss our building. So she saw the plane go in, and then a short time afterwards, the South Tower came down. She didn't know I was there. She still thought I was up at the ASPCA. So she put her cardigan over Muffin, and she set off with all the others running towards the Brooklyn Bridge. They got to the Brooklyn Bridge to try and get into Brooklyn, and somebody said there's a bomb on the bridge. And they all shouted, let's get off of there. So they ran off the Brooklyn Bridge, and then they went onto the FDR. Thousands of them. And this is a picture of that morning. So Mickey with the Muffin the cat, they start running up the FDR drive with everybody else. You can see all the debris, and this is about a mile or so up from where it happened. So all the crowds are running up the FDR drive, and Mickey's there with Muffin, covered in her cardigan. She's been running for about 10 or 15 minutes with all these people, and she suddenly thought, why am I running? And where am I going to go? So she turned around and went against the flow and headed back to Lower Manhattan. And how she got past the police, I have no idea. But she gets into Battery Park, and through all the haze, and it's like thick London fog, or like the fogs we used to get, she sees this group of people in the middle of the park. Nobody else, no police or anyone, just this group of people. And she gets nearer, and she starts to recognize, oh, it's some of Paul's crew. So she gets up to the crew, and they're putting Paul on the stretcher. I mean, what a coincidence that is. by this time they thought I needed medical treatment. So I'm going on the stretcher. So Mickey and Muffin have arrived with me. I'm put on a stretcher, taken into an ambulance and taken round the corner to the Staten Island ferry terminal, which was just not far around the corner, which was the triage. Now, doctors and nurses were in there waiting for this mass of casualties. Now, there weren't any. I mean, you either died or you survived. There were injuries early on when the fuel came down and hit people on the initial impact, but not many after that. You either were killed or you survived. So I go into this triage unit with Mickey and Muffin and all the nurses and doctors there. I'm on my stretcher and I have a neck brace on, so I can't see anything, but I can hear them. And they're looking at my head and everything, and then they say, we've got to get him off to hospital. Now, everything on Manhattan was out of bounds, certainly on the south side of Manhattan. So all the casualties, or any casualty, was going to be taken to Staten Island, which is a ferry ride from the main island. So they told the paramedics that were with me, take him to the ferry and get him over to Staten Island. It's a 15-minute boat ride. And this is the actual ferry that we were on. And they pushed me. I'm there on the front with Mickey and Muffin. And after this, Giuliani, the mayor, he closed off the whole island. No boats, no planes, no nothing. Bridges all shut. We get to the other side, and I couldn't see it, but I could hear Mickey talking to the paramedics. Oh, and on the way across, they were pumping water into my eyes. They used about 5 gallons in the end. I was wet through by this stage. We get to the other side, and at the ferry, there was lines of ambulances and crowds waiting to see all these casualties coming off, and there wasn't any but me. So I'm on my stretcher. We get into the ambulance. I go in on the stretcher with the 2 paramedics that were with us, plus the paramedics that were with the ambulance. And we set off for the University Hospital, which was about 1.5 miles, 2 miles from the ferry terminal. And obviously the guy, the driver, has been waiting all day for somebody from the 9/11 job. And we get on board and off we go. Well, I've never had a ride like it. We were flying around, the guys with the water were flying around, Muffin and Mickey were flying from one end of the ambulance to the other. It was doing about 80, 90 miles an hour. Amazing ride. If I hadn't been killed at 9/11, it wasn't far off on Staten Island. So we arrive at the hospital, and as we get into the car park there, we can see all these wooden chairs, school chairs that they've put out for all the relatives and relations of casualties. Nobody there. So Mickey goes with Muffin and sits on the chair, and I'm taken into A&E with a group of nurses. Well, that was the ambulance ride. Hospital. So I'm taken into the hospital with my neck brace on, and I can't see anything. I'm just looking at the lights going down the corridor, and it suddenly stops. And then I just see all these nurses looking at me, and they start cutting all my clothes off. Everything, knickers, the lot, so I'm there naked. And I can hear this water running. And I said, what's going on? They said, oh, we're going to put you... And I heard some saying, oh, is it too hot? Is it cold? Oh, it's a bit cold, put some hot water in. I said, what are you doing? And they said, we're going to put you into our decontamination unit. You're the first person that's ever used it. And I said, why are you doing that? They said, well, we think there might be anthrax or some other chemical warfare type thing that the guys have had on the plane, because by now it was obviously confirmed that it was a terrorist incident. And so I'm lying there, I'm lifted off the stretcher, put into the water, and they wash me all around. I'm then put back on the stretcher and wheeled into the trauma unit with the surgeons in there, and they look with the big lights at me, look at my head, and said, yeah, you've got a 3-inch gash there, but it stopped bleeding. We're not going to interfere with it, we'll just clean it up, and you can go. So that took about 10 minutes. I'm then taken out, of the trauma unit and given a white CSI suit, paper suit that you get, like you get from B&Q. I've nothing on underneath, so I put this paper suit on and some, I think, sort of paper socks as well. And the nurses took me into a cubicle. A policeman comes in, and I have to make a statement about all that has happened to me that afternoon or that morning. He goes, and I'm sat there. Suddenly the door bursts open. You're not going to believe this. Nurse comes in with a tray of food, and she says, eat this. And it was roast beef and Yorkshire pudding and vegetables, roast potatoes, and apple pie and custard. Now, can you believe this? After all that, this is thrust at me. I couldn't really eat it at all. Anyway, I'm then discharged officially, so I wander out into the car park. Chairs are there, nobody else, and Muffin and Mickey. So I go and sit next to them, and Mickey says, what are we going to do now? And I said, well, we're still alive. So we're sitting there, and the smoke's drifting across like this, and it stunk. Every major incident leaves a signature smell. It's a smell. Anybody that's been in a major incident, you can ask them what it is that brings them back, and it's a smell. And the 9/11 smell was burning plastic. So if I get a smell of that now, it takes me back to all this. So we were sitting there, and a nurse came up to us and said, you look a bit forlorn, you two, what's happening? And we said, we'd know where to go. My phone, my credit cards, ID, and everything I got had been confiscated because the FBI were seizing everything from any casualties that came in, especially from underneath the towers where I was, just in case they are villains and things. So I had nothing, we'd nothing, Mickey had nothing. She'd only got a dress that she'd put on that morning, and Muffin in his little carrier. We were taken to this house where I had a proper shower, cleaned up. I was given the guy's jeans. He was a 6-foot guy, and Y-fronts that came up to here. And they looked after us for that night and gave us dinner, hot dinner. After dinner, we'd managed to keep the camera with us, the smash camera. I looked at it and pressed play, and up came that stuff. I was absolutely amazed. The camera was just smashed to smithereens. But because it was made of alloy or something, it preserved the tape in it, and we got those great shots. The next morning, the guys at the house we were staying at managed to get a friend to take us back to Manhattan on a boat. So I had his big blue jeans on and Y-fronts and a T-shirt. This is West Street, and it was there where I got hit. So something in that pile there clobbered me. And then when I escaped and crawled, I was going down there somewhere. And then I thought about Lulu there, and then came back and looked, and this is where I found the tape recorder and the smash camera. And this is the view that I was looking at. That's that building there that was on fire. And all this lot was on fire, and I could just see bits of the tower there embedded in the road just further down. And that was Gregory's car that we were at when we started the afternoon command post there. So you can see that is the really centre of the whole action. And that's where I was stood when I looked at this amazing sight. We went down to Florida not long after that when we had a house down there, and spent a few days coming to terms with that. Was Muffin after his ordeal. And we then flew back to England. 3 weeks later, I was on a plane and went back to New York and was in at Ground Zero. I was the first cameraman to be allowed into Ground Zero because believe it or not, the guy in charge of Ground Zero Search and Rescue was Mike Puzziferi. And so I had the privilege, or not, whatever you think, of being there with him as he searched for all his colleagues for the next 3 or 4 months there. And we made an amazing documentary called 911 The Firefighter's Story. Some of you might have seen it. It was on Channel 5. But the great thing, and which was a great honor for me, was that the New York Fire Department decided that that was the best film, if you can call it that, about the events of that day that affected the New York Fire Department. And now that film is shown to every recruit in the New York Fire Department when they start, out of all the films that have been made about this. And that's about it, folks. Apart from one thing, that we're pleased to know that Mr. Muffin is still with us in his 18th year now, and he's as adventurous as we are. So he gets up to lots of mischief every day, so it's in his genes. He's got my DNA or whatever. So that's more or less it, everybody. Have you got any questions? I'm trying to get through this as soon as I can. We're running a bit late now anyway. Anybody, any questions? No? Yep. Pardon? Sorry, I can't hear.
Hang on, we got a microphone coming.
I know Lulu survived. Did the other lady also get through it?
Did what, sorry?
The other lady on your crew, both of your producer, did she also survive?
Yeah, Becky survived. She'd run into the post office with some of the other crowd.
Oh, okay.
Before the tower came down. And Lulu had been rescued by one of the fire chiefs. So, yeah, and the rest of the crew were fine, yeah.
I'm not sure that questions really will be forthcoming.
No, I don't think there will be with that story.
I suspect your reaction to this is the same as the first time I heard it. I think we should just appreciate this with a round of applause.
Can I just...
Let's run with it.
Can I bring Mickey up to the stage? Mickey? I'd like to say thanks to Mickey because she's lived through all this and she's lived through all my adventures. And this is just one of many things that she's had to suffer all her life. And she's still by my side. And yeah. So, I mean, as you saw, she was very much part of all that, and luckily we're still here to tell the tale anyway, so I hope we don't have any more, Martin, now.
I have decided that the safest place to be is within 5 yards of Paul, or no closer than 5 miles.
Yeah, I think you draw...
We're okay in here now. Yeah. This is fine. Paul, we have been honoured beyond words to have you with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
There is nothing sensational about this story. It's just the way it was. And when I said at the beginning it was life-affirming, I hope you now understand a bit more about what I said. This room is full of professionals who are used to this sort of world in their own ways, and I know there are people here that have had experiences similar to this, but nothing quite on this scale. And it has been a privilege to have you here.
Thank you very much, Martin.
And I would like, on behalf of everybody, to say thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're flying back tomorrow, Mickey and I. Just to say, on the way here, we flew from Leeds Airport. We got on the plane, and we just got to the end of the runway, and it was just revving up its engines, and it all stops. We've got an engine warning light come on. Not long before that, I'd landed at Leeds and Bradford Airport, same airport. We'd been on holiday somewhere around here. And as we landed, we didn't know at the time, but we'd burst 2 or 3 tyres and they were on fire. A little airport like that, nothing had happened all year until yesterday with a warning light, and then So everywhere I go, it happens. I mean, I actually do a 2-hour presentation about my life over the last 50 yards, and all those stories are in it. But it's just unbelievable. I mean, but for a, I suppose, cameraman journalist, I'm always in the wrong place at the right time, really. So I'm lucky to have got through what I have done. But certainly that day, you know, was pretty awful, and I hope we never ever see anything like that again. And thanks to you guys, I hope we don't. But you just don't know what's coming around the corner. And as you know, we all get up that morning, everything's fine, and then bang. Okay, thanks very much, everybody, and have a nice trip home. Thank you.